Hello everyone, this is part 1 of What If Naruto Was Betrayed by His Friends. This story is made by Holy Brother, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Shut up, shouted Naruto. Water droplets fell from his spiky blonde hair, and his breath briefly materialized in small gray puffs as he stood tall facing his enemy. The black and orange tunic that he wore was soaked from being in the weather. He clenched his teeth together in anger. The low light seemed to make the metal on his forehead protector glisten. I will never lose to someone like you, he shouted. His determined voice echoed through the woods, only to be swallowed by the persistent dripping of raindrops into small puddles and onto the large leaves of the trees that surrounded them. Though there was no wind, gray clouds could be seen moving across the sky, and they blocked most of the sun's warmth. I will protect Konoha, shouted Naruto defiantly as he reached into his wet utility pouch and retrieved a long, sharp kunai. As he held it up preparing to fight his enemy, small droplets of water gathered on its dark metal surface and eventually dropped off its sharp end. Though he watched his opponent carefully, every passing moment found him more and more anxious to strike. His bright blue eyes hardly blinked, and the stripes on his face seemed to grow larger and darker as he stared down his opponent. I will never forgive you, he said in a lower and more deliberate tone. His opponent laughed as she looked at the anger of the leaf shinobi. She stood in a taunting pose as the rain continued to fall from the skies. Her boot-clad foot landed in a small puddle as she stepped slowly toward Naruto. The water rippled around it as if it were trying to flee from the presence of a terrible enemy. The ambient light seemed to shine on her forehead protector, illuminating the scratched-out symbol for the hidden village of Konoha. She pulled her black gloves tighter around her hands and pulled a stray lock of pink hair behind her ear. Sakura-chan, shouted Naruto. As he uttered the familiar name of his opponent, she smiled. Naruto, said Sakura softly. You are so naive. Her voice was soft and smooth, but Naruto found no comfort in her tone. Rather he stepped cautiously, realizing that any direct hit he took from his powerful enemy could be lethal. Her chakra training under the fifth Hokage had augmented her natural talent tremendously, and he had seen her demolish buildings with a single punch. More than this, however, Naruto had a visual reminder of the danger right before him. Her black robe was drenched, but it was not only from the rain. It was covered in the bee of leaf shinobi that she had. Terrifying splotches surrounded the familiar red cloud design that appeared on her Akatsuki attire. There is nothing naive about being loyal, shouted Naruto. I will stop you. With what? Taunted Sakura. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, shouted Naruto as a dozen shadow clones materialized before him. His clones dashed toward Sakura with tremendous speed, pointing their weapons toward her. In less than a second they had closed the distance between themselves and Sakura and began wildly and lunging. She effortlessly dodged their attacks and countered with hits of her own. The shadow clones made a distinct air puffing noise as they vanished away, revealing that Sakura had successfully avoided all of Naruto's attacks. You cannot stop me, said Sakura coolly as she continued to approach the blonde ninja. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, shouted Naruto as hundreds of clones appeared all around Sakura. The number will not change the result, said Sakura as they began pouring down on her like the rain from the clouds above. The faster they attacked, the quicker Sakura seemed to dance around as she seamlessly dispelled shadow clone after shadow clone in a flurry of motion. Rasengan, shouted Naruto as he dove into the pile hoping to strike her while she was preoccupied. The constant puffing sound of his clones being vaporized grew louder as he fell toward the center of the action. Sakura was punching and kicking so powerfully that she was destroying dozens of clones with each of her attacks. Naruto tried to suppress the growing terror in his heart as he neared his opponent. At last he saw an opening and leapt with tremendous speed toward Sakura. His powerful attack connected with her and threw her and dozens of clones backward. She skidded across the muddy ground until colliding into the thick trunk of a tree and slouching over completely unconscious. Suddenly, she puffed away, revealing a log in her own place. A replacement technique, whispered Naruto in confusion. Suddenly he felt a tremendous pain in his back and felt himself flying through the air. Sakura rushed underneath him as he flew in between tree trunks. Using her speed, she moved to Naruto's projected landing place and punched the ground, causing a large amount of hard earth and rocks to fly up and collide with the flying leaf ninja. I defeated the fifth Hokage, said Sakura, the strongest of Konoha, and you thought you could defeat me with these cheap tricks. She pulled Naruto up by his black collar and held him above her triumphantly. Why have you done this, Sakura? Whispered Naruto as he struggled to maintain consciousness. Why would you be a part of Akatsuki? His question seemed to catch Sakura off guard. She paused as she saw a small amount of bee trickle out of Naruto's mouth and drip onto her dark robe. To see what I was capable of, she said slowly. Goodbye, Naruto-kun. She tossed him into the air and threw a tremendous punch that landed squarely in the center of his chest and sent him flying into the air out of Sakura's vision. She smiled and wiped her hands off as the rain continued falling all around her. I am going after him, said Hinata resolutely. Her white eyes seemed to glisten in the low light as she spoke. Her voice was usually coupled with hesitation, and her stance typically reflected self-doubt, but there was not even a hint of these qualities as she stood before her friends. Her dark hair was still wet from the rain that had fallen and from her previous battle. Her fists were clenched with determination. Hinata, said Shino. It is not as if he is simply lost. Shino's voice was calm and low. The thick hood that covered his head was drenched, but it did not seem to bother the bug user. Akatsuki captured him, he continued. Hinata furrowed her brow in anger. All the more reason to go after him, she said. Had his face been visible, Hinata would have seen a frown upon it. Shino knew that the Hyuga shinobi was not being objective. He had never been a fan of Naruto's emotional outbursts. Though he had come to expect similar behavior from Kiba, he had always considered himself fortunate that at least Hinata, his other teammate, would not try to impose her personal views on everyone else. Her eyes looked at him as if accusing him. How can you abandon a comrade? Hinata's gaze seemed to demand. Her clenched fists reminded him that it would be ineffective to try and reason with her. In spite of her menacing demeanor, Shino spoke again. You are only going because it's him, said Shino softly. Her expression slowly softened, and her fists gradually relaxed as she looked at her cloaked companion. Her head lowered slightly as she thought about her motivations. It was true that she had feelings for Naruto, but as hard as she tried, she had not been able to hide that fact from anyone except her favorite blonde ninja. She wondered if it was Shino that had been captured instead of Naruto, whether she would be as anxious to fight Akatsuki. She pulled a stray lock of her jet black hair behind her ear and looked at the ground. She felt slightly ashamed that she had been so bold. She did not want to put others in danger, and she was not anxious to fight the most terrible, powerful ninja organization the world had seen in years. Let's return to Konoha and speak with Hokage-sama, suggested the bug user. Shino was pleased to see that she had calmed down. The sound of water dripping off the leaves on trees into nearby puddles surrounded the pair of Konoha ninjas, and seemed to soothe their lingering anxiety. Hinata raised her head again and spoke in a calm and deliberate voice. I will not linger here or in Konoha, she said slowly. Shino was surprised at the serenity of her defiance. She raised her head, and though his sunglasses covered his eyes, it was as if she could see right through the dark lenses as she spoke. I will not give up, she said. Her eyes seemed to light up even brighter. I will not take back my words, that is my way of the ninja. Shino lowered his head. He could tell it would be useless to try and persuade her further. Very well, he said finally. But do not rush into traps, and take this. He lifted his hand and a small bug flew off the tip of his index finger and landed on Hinata's shoulder. I intend to return to Konoha and gather at least a couple other ninja before pursuing Naruto, he said. The female will allow me to catch up to you after I have done this. Hinata nodded and turned in the direction Naruto had been taken by the black-cloaked figures. She turned back to Shino as if wanting to say something more. He turned toward Konoha and leapt into the trees. She watched him vanish behind the trunks of trees in the distance and turned again toward her target. Byakugan, she whispered. Her sight expanded and she became aware of everything around her. She could see a small dark bird flying in the distance, and the ripples of hundreds of water droplets splashing into puddles underneath hundreds of leaves. After a few moments of searching, she found what she was looking for, A footprint on a tree branch belonging to the Akatsuki agent that grabbed Naruto. She had felt so helpless watching the dark-robed figures take him from their side. One of them had punched the ground, causing the earth to break up and swallow both her and Shino. By the time they managed to climb their way out from under the heaps of earth, they found their other enemy had draped Naruto over the tip of his long wrapped sword unconscious. Hinata had rushed to try and attack the Akatsuki ninja, but he lifted his arm and blasted her back with a tidal wave attack that had thrown him back several hundred yards before dissipating. It took Hinata and Shino a minute to gather their breath before Hinata had boldly declared that she would be going after Naruto. She paused at the footprint only for a moment to confirm that she was traveling in the correct direction. As she identified the next sign of her targets, she leapt with tremendous speed. Each branch bounced her gently further toward Naruto. She could not help but imagine what she wanted to do when she reached her beloved ninja. She was sure she could find a way to capture him back and escape. Then she could nurse his injuries. She imagined Naruto opening his bright blue eyes and smiling up at her. She shook her head, trying to focus on what her plan would be when she found Akatsuki. Hours passed as she relentlessly pursued her enemies. Her eyes scanned for traps, but she found only bark, leaves, and an occasional squawking raven among the limbs of the trees she raced between. The sensation of water dripping onto her smooth skin became more frequent. As she glanced upward, she could see the clouds darkening. Each moment that passed brought rain with greater intensity. At last her powerful Byakugan technique brought her attention away from the storms above and focused in on two people. She focused hard to identify the two shapes. It was not difficult for her to realize that the two were locked in combat. Suddenly two became a dozen. Naruto-kun, she thought to herself. It was only moments before the number had fallen again to two. Suddenly hundreds of Naruto's shadow clones filled the forests. Do your best, Naruto-kun, she thought as she leapt closer. As much as she could perceive, she was still quite some distance from them. Though she strained to identify the person that Naruto fought, there were too many shadow clones for her to tell. After another minute of combat, it appeared that Naruto would land his all-impressive Rasengan technique, but to her horror, she saw Naruto's opponent perform a replacement technique and counter-attack. Wah! Whispered Hinata as she identified the opponent Naruto faced. She nearly fell from the shock of seeing Sakura clad in bee-stained Akatsuki robes attacking her beloved Naruto. She gathered her breath and her balance on the muddy ground below the branches. Sakura-san, she whispered. Hinata gasped in horror as she perceived Sakura toss Naruto up and punch him with such intensity that he flew almost beyond Hinata's perception. She became furious and leapt faster toward Naruto. She clenched her fists as she watched Sakura wipe her hands in the falling rain. Suddenly, Sakura vanished. Hinata tried to increase her concentration, knowing that she could not afford to let Sakura out of her perception for long. Hinata-san, shouted Sakura. Hinata whirled around to see her pink-haired foe. How did you? Started Hinata. She immediately thought back to Shino's counsel to avoid rushing into traps. How had she missed this? How did I avoid the detection of your Byakugan technique? Interrupted Sakura. It is impressive, isn't it? Sakura stepped slowly toward Hinata. Why are you doing this, Sakura? Asked Hinata as she stepped back defensively. It is such a shock to see someone that you know and respect turn out to be someone like me, isn't it, Hinata-san? But I have become more than I ever was before. If I had to choose again, I would not choose differently. Said Sakura softly. Hinata suddenly found herself unable to move. Water from the puddles nearby had wrapped around her and bound her in place. She was again horrified that her Byakugan had given her absolutely no warning. More than the impending danger of Sakura pulling her gloves tight, and more than her new ability to control water, Hinata was most afraid that she could no longer trust her own skills now that Sakura had found a way to sneak by her Byakugan. Her 360-degree vision should have given her warning in both cases. You won't get away with this, said Hinata. What? Will your little bug stop me? Asked Sakura in a mocking tone as she pointed to the small flying creature that hovered above Hinata's shoulder. A stream of water leapt from a nearby puddle and swallowed the bug that Shino had given to her. Fear filled Hinata's heart as she saw her tiny ally swept away by the stream of Sakura's water technique. No, said a voice coming from the side. Hinata's heart skipped a beat as she struggled against her bonds to see whether her ears had deceived her. Naruto-kun, said Sakura in a puzzled tone. He was soaked and covered in mud. His face had been scratched and lacerated by branches during his painful flight, but he had returned whole and conscious. Hinata smiled as she saw her hero standing up against their opponent. Though she felt embarrassed that she was not in a position to help, her shame could not match her relief and happiness that Naruto was not seriously hurt. I will stop you, said Naruto in a low determined voice. His bright blue eyes flashed with anger, and his blonde hair dripped as the rain fell. Sakura stepped back cautiously as she saw her attack had not been able to stop her former teammate. A subtle red glow began to swirl around his body, and it seemed that even the rain was avoiding falling on him. The stripes on his face darkened, and his nails became longer. You have hurt enough people, Sakura, said Naruto. I will not let you hurt Hinata-chan. The number one surprising ninja, muttered Sakura. Naruto pointed his fist toward Sakura. Release Hinata, shouted Naruto. Hinata smiled as she watched her favorite ninja contend on her behalf, but at the same time, she wanted to avoid becoming a burden to Naruto. She struggled earnestly to find a way to escape her watery prison. Or else what? Chided Sakura as she put her hands on her hips. Come on, surprising ninja. Naruto clenched his teeth. More red chakra began swirling around him. Suddenly he vanished. Sakura immediately leapt back defensively. Naruto narrowly missed her as he leapt to tackle her. Sakura countered with a punch of her own, but before her fist could land, Naruto dashed around her and struck her in the back. She flew forward several yards before skidding to a stop. To Naruto's surprise, she puffed away, revealing that he had only struck another replication. Too slow, shouted Sakura as she spun around, delivering a powerful chakra-concentrated kick. To her shock, Naruto grabbed her leg and spun her around, throwing her against a tree trunk. It looks like I won't be able to hold back as much now, said Sakura. She formed a flurry of seals. Water began to flow around her that quickly materialized into 3 identical water clones. Hinata finally managed to free herself from the watery tendrils that had bound her. She focused closely on Sakura with her Byakugan technique. She carefully stepped into a defensive stance and backed away cautiously. She decided that Shino had been right when he suggested she not rush into any traps. She glanced over toward Naruto. He immediately leapt to attack Sakura. I suppose there are other schools of thought, she said to herself as Naruto began wildly at the water clones. He was able to destroy one of them that seemed to burst into a cloud of thick steam, but a second clone was able to s her fist into Naruto's face. The burning red chakra that surrounded him seemed to evaporate part of Sakura's clone, and filled the air with steam. The other clone kicked Naruto down, and completely evaporated. The hot thick cloud made visibility become increasingly difficult for Naruto, and though he and swung, he could not see the real Sakura summoning more and more water until he found himself surrounded and unable to breathe. He fought hard to leap out of his growing watery prison, but it was as if he was surrounded by a bubble that followed his movements such that he could not escape. Yuokan, 8 trigrams 64 palms, shouted Hinata. Sakura whirled around to find Hinata unleashing increasing series of hits against her. Sakura tried to avoid some of the hits so that her chakra control would not be off, but the speed and accuracy of Hinata's attacks made it impossible to avoid. As the water prison dissipated, Naruto looked down to see Hinata's powerful attacks push Sakura further and further back. Her long dark hair flipped as she flawlessly whirled about her jutsu. Naruto could not help but be amazed at Hinata's success. Everything he had thrown at Sakura, she had countered, but Hinata had found opportunity to strike while Naruto had distracted her. At last Sakura fell backwards and landed on the ground. Hinata stood tall over her fallen opponent. The rain slowly stopped, but the air was still cool enough that small puffs of air could be seen each time Hinata gasped to recover her breath. Hinata, shouted Naruto. That was amazing. She smiled before she turned to face her favorite ninja. Although her Byakugan ability had not ceased. Your tenketsus were closed, shouted Naruto in confusion. Sakura laughed as she summoned a stream of water to leap from her free hand and wrap around Hinata's face. Sakura punched her in the back, throwing her with tremendous force into a tree trunk 100 yards away. Sakura's bee-splotched Akatsuki robes fluttered slightly as she stood up straight again. You can never beat me with such pathetic techniques, said Sakura with a laugh. You underestimated me. Naruto clenched his fists as he stared at Sakura. The ambient light shined brightly on her forehead protector, and seeing the emblem of his home desecrated filled him with anger. No, we didn't, shouted Hinata. She had somehow managed to pick herself up and rush back to Naruto's side. He spun his head to face her in confusion. How had she recovered? Why did she no longer maintain her defensive stance facing the traitor of Konoha? Sakura raised an eyebrow in confusion as she looked at the now confident Hyuga. Had she actually determined the source of her power? It's over, I can see through your technique, said Hinata softly. See what? Asked Naruto. He looked back at Sakura trying to perceive what he might be missing. The bee robe had become a little dirtier after Hinata had knocked Sakura back, but other than that she appeared no different to the blonde ninja. That isn't Sakura, said Hinata. Naruto whirled about in confusion. That's the only way she could have got past my Byakugan, said Hinata. The same way that Kurenai-sensei could. Huh? Asked Naruto. How did she do that? Hinata continued. There's only one person I have ever heard of that managed to recover quickly after having their tenketsu closed, said Hinata as she looked briefly toward Naruto. As talented as Sakura is, she has never used any water element techniques, and as strong as she is, there's no way I would be able to recover so quickly after being hit by her. Yeah, Hinata, how did you do that? Asked Naruto. It's because I wasn't actually hit, I was only given the perception of being thrown hundreds of yards, said Hinata. Oh, said Naruto. Hinata could tell he was still confused. This has all been genjutsu, said Hinata. Oh, said Naruto as he looked back at Sakura. Your perception is better than I anticipated, Hinata, Sakura said slowly. Since I have delayed the QB long enough, there is no reason for me to continue running you in circles here in the woods. Sakura seemed to melt away into the air, leaving Naruto and Hinata alone. Byakugan, whispered Hinata, who wanted to make sure that there were not real enemies waiting to ambush them when the illusion fell. After a few moments of searching turned up nothing, she could not help but feel anxiety about being alone with Uzumaki Naruto. Hinata-chan, said Naruto softly. Hinata discontinued her technique so she could look at him with her natural sight. Though the rain had now stopped, several spiky locks of his blonde hair had beads of clear water dangling from them. The stripes on his face had thinned somewhat, and the chrome finish of his forehead protector reflected a beam of emerging sunlight. Her breathing slowed as she tried to take in every detail. I'm not very good at defending against illusion techniques like that, admitted Naruto. His voice was soft, yet Hinata still felt a dormant strength behind every word. It was the kind of strength that helped him get up again after getting knocked down. He recognized his weaknesses and trained hard to overcome them. I should have known that Sakura-chan would never really betray Granny Tsunade. And there's no way that a Hokage would lose in a fight like that. Naruto-kun, whispered Hinata. She looked up nervously into his blue eyes. She longed to pull him close. She stuttered. I feel the same way, Hinata, said Naruto slowly. Hinata blushed deeply. She had yearned for her confident ninja to prize her. Naruto smiled and continued. I think we should go back to Konoha to see why they were trying to distract us. Hinata lowered her head. She had been hoping that Naruto would acknowledge her at least, but though he had not responded in the way she had anticipated at first, she knew that he had a good point. They did need to go back to Konoha. She knew better than to hope that the illusion of Sakura spoke with idle words when she mentioned stalling the QB. There was some reason for the ordeal they had gone through. She turned toward the village that both she and Naruto loved so much. You're right, Naruto-kun, said Hinata softly. We should not linger here. The two ninjas started off toward Konoha. Oh, and Hinata, said Naruto as they started walking. Hinata turned to look at Naruto as she leapt into the branches of the trees. You really were amazing, said Naruto. If you hadn't had seen through that genjutsu, it could have been bad for me. I'm glad you came after me, Hinata laughed softly. Inwardly, she could not find words to express the emotions that came over her. Compassion for Naruto, growled for being able to help him, happiness that he had actually acknowledged her in a small way, and fear of frightening him away if he knew just how much she cared for him. She decided it would be best to try and focus on something else as they traveled, but the only unusual thing they came across as they leapt through the tree branches was a strangely familiar raven that shrieked from above them. Aberrane Shino loved Shinobi Rule 25. This law was intended to prevent ninja from becoming emotionally involved and making mistakes. He had become the model of objectivity among ninja in the hidden village of Leaf, and sometimes his comrades wondered if he had completely divorced himself from his emotions. His voice was almost always low and monotone, and he employed a speaking style that Naruto had mocked on several occasions. Perhaps his consistency came from his upbringing. The Aberrane clan prided themselves in never underestimating anyone, even someone as small as a bug. It was especially appropriate since they housed large colonies of insects in their body, and using their chakra, controlled the swarms to help them accomplish missions. The bugs needed relatively stable environments in which to thrive, and perhaps this need helped mold Shino into the enigmatic master of stoicism that his comrades had come to respect. All of the training and consistency that he had ever known was undone in a single moment. Though the sun had finally burned several holes in the thick cloud cover above and the rain had ceased, Shino's face wrap was getting wetter. Tears tricked down his cheeks from underneath his dark sunglasses. He could not help but weep as he stood at the broken entrance to the hidden village of Konoha and saw the broken bee of about a dozen Ninja Academy students. Among them was a little girl with small bugs crawling and flying around her body. In the distance, Shino perceived the sound of weapons clanging together. His heart mixed an awful blend of wrath and anguish. He slowly tried to dry his eyes and catch his breath. He knew that he would not be useful unless he calmed down. "Where are Naruto and Hinata?" came a voice from behind Shino. There was great urgency that laced the question. He whirled around and trying to pretend he felt nothing. He saw the face of the strongest ninja in the village. "Hokage-sama," said Shino, still attempting to mask the grief in his voice. Tsunade's stern expression softened slightly as she looked at Shino. She had never seen him emotional, and she could not help but feel compassion for one of her suffering shinobi. The attack had not been totally unexpected, but the number of attackers was not something they had been prepared for. "Hokage-sama," shouted another ninja as he ran to meet their leader. That was the last of them. He panted to regain his breath. "Very good," replied Tsunade. "Let's get as many ninja as we can find. Help move the wounded into the hospital." "Yes, Hokage-sama," he replied. He immediately began running off. "Shino," said Tsunade softly. "Where are Hinata and Naruto?" Shino cleared his tea before responding. "We were ambushed by Akatsuki," said Shino. "They took Naruto. Hinata decided to follow after him, and I came here to get backup. Hinata is carrying one of my bugs, so I should be able to track her without much difficulty. Most of the Junin are quite some distance from here," said Tsunade. "We were hoping that the three of you would provide us with help." She sighed in disappointment. "I will be forced to recall some of our other ninja in outlying countries to help with our defenses then, there is no other choice." "What would you have me do?" asked Shino. "Help with the injured before gathering a few free ninja," replied Tsunade. "Then go ahead and bring Naruto and Hinata back. This mission is not a win at all costs scenario, Shino, we have lost enough lives already." Shino nodded. Though he tried to dismiss the pain in his heart, his eyes could not withhold from shedding another pair of tears. Tsunade turned toward the hospital. She had longed to escape the heaps of paperwork that were laid before her, but this was not the method she had had in mind. Hundreds of warriors in dark robes had rushed through the entrance and overpowered the guards there. She especially felt bad about the small class of academy students that had been taking a walk by the village entrance. She wished that she might have been there. The attacking ninja were mostly Chunin-level ninjas, and she could have prevented most of the carnage that they inflicted. Their selfless nature bothered her deeply. It seemed a very foreign idea that they were willing to give up their lives to kill only a few leaf ninja. She kept her worries to herself as she sped toward the hospital. She would not let what might have been done differently in the past prevent her from making a difference here and now. That was the wisdom she had gleaned from Uzumaki Naruto when Jiraiya had found her 3 years before and offered her the position she now held. "I will go with you," said Sakura as she hurried with Shino to an injured shinobi crying for help. Shino had managed to get control of his emotions again. "Thank you, Sakura," he said. "A medical ninja will be vital in a mission against Akatsuki." Sakura did not need that reminder. She thought back to her first mission after Naruto had returned from his training with Jiraiya. Her skills had helped both her own team and her sand allies defeat a vicious Akatsuki opponent named Sasori. After a brief journey, they arrived at the hospital. Medical ninja were busily rushing back and forth tending to the wounded. I will meet you in 2 hours, Shino, said Sakura as she rushed to help the other medical ninja. As Shino turned to leave, he found Lee approaching the hospital carrying a wooden beam draped with about a dozen injured ninja. Lee, said Shino. He gently placed the beam down and flashed a smile at the bug user. Let me help you. Thanks, Shino, said Lee as he began carrying a pair of injured villagers into the hospital. It was not long before they had brought them all into the building to receive medical treatment. Ino and Sakura rushed to help the injured villagers. I wish I had been at the gates, said Lee softly as he turned to Shino. There were many opponents, but the strength of my youth could have stopped them. Shino had never understood Lee's love for the springtime of youth, pontification that Maito Guy loved to recite. In fact, no one else understood the philosophy of these taijutsu masters, but even though they seemed obnoxiously over-enthusiastic, no one could deny the great strength and determination. They were by no means the greatest strategists in Konoha, but they were the most tenacious hard workers in any hidden village. Lee, said Shino, the fifth has asked me to assemble a few ninja and go after Naruto and Hinata. I would like you to come with us. Lee did not seem to notice the hint of emotion in Shino's voice, or the small tear that had just appeared underneath his sunglasses. Shino also longed to have been at the gates, but he knew there was nothing that could be done now. Naruto-kun, asked Lee. Of course I will come with you. This mission is not without danger, said Shino. Naruto was captured by powerful Akatsuki agents. Hinata is keeping on their trail, but even with our combined strength, there's no way they can keep up with us in the springtime of our youth, shouted Lee energetically. Shino fought the impulse to sigh. We will be meeting in a couple hours at the gates, said Shino. I want to see about recruiting another ninja to join us. Lee nodded and rushed off. Shino turned and headed further into the village. Even behind the cloud cover, the sun was growing closer to the horizon. He wondered how Hinata and Naruto were faring. A mental picture came into his head of Naruto getting knocked unconscious from fighting ninja far stronger than he was, and Hinata falling unconscious because she was near Naruto. His worries caused him to walk a bit quicker to his destination. Shino, came a voice from nearby. Tenten, said Shino softly. I would like your help with a mission. Sakura and Lee were waiting by the gate when Tenten and Shino appeared. The sky had darkened considerably, though most of the clouds had been swept away by a strong breeze that had kicked up from the south. The brightest of stars began to reveal their shine as the light of the sun waned away in the west. As the group gathered together and checked their equipment, a strange sight appeared on the horizon. What is it? Asked Lee. The low light made it difficult to see precisely what approached Konoha. It almost looked like a leafless, branchless walking tree at first, but after a little more time had passed, they realized that it was a man carrying a large wrapped item over his shoulder. Tenten shuddered as she suddenly remembered the silhouette. Hoshigaki Kisame, she whispered. The others turned to face her. He's a powerful ninja from Akatsuki. You've fought him before? Asked Lee. Tenten shot Lee a look of confusion. You were there, Lee, she said. Was I? He asked confused. You're just like Guy-sensei, muttered Tenten. Look, said Sakura pointing again to the horizon. Behind the swordsman they saw a large group of other ninja marching toward them. It's another attack. I will inform Hokage-sama, shouted Tenten as she rushed back to the village. Hold them off until we return. Shino nodded. He was glad that Tenten had volunteered for that job. He knew it had to be done, but he did not want to have to do it. He wanted to stay here at the gates. He wanted to be the first to meet the enemies of Konoha. Sakura tightened her gloves. Lee leapt up and down to stay limber. Shino lifted his arms, and his constant allies began pouring out his sleeves and flying around him. This time, the shinobi of Konoha would be prepared to protect the beloved home. Naruto and Hinata increased their speed as the sun set in the west. The small amount of warmth that the sun had brought after appearing from behind the clouds was now being diminished by its descent on the horizon. Hinata was thinking about two things. Her bloodline limit and training made this a simple task, as she naturally augmented her eyesight with her Byakugan technique to help her detect any danger lay in front of them on their way back to the hidden village of Konoha. As important as it was for them to avoid additional traps, Hinata could not help but let some of her focus fall on Naruto. His spiky blonde hair bounced as he aggressively launched himself off of each branch, and the fading light reflected a soft orange color off of his eyes and forehead protector. Naruto was thinking about two things. This was a rare thing for him, as his attention was typically only broad enough to think about a single thing at a time. The first thing on his mind was the security of Konoha. He wondered why Akatsuki would try and delay him when they had so openly made their intentions to capture all of the Jinchuriki. He possessed the chakra of the nine-tailed fox, and it made more sense to him that they would delay his friends and capture him rather than the other way around. He was unable to come up with any ideas to explain Akatsuki's motives because his mind was simultaneously thinking of one other thing. He was hungry. Every leap he took brought him one step closer to a bowl of delicious ramen. His mouth watered as he imagined the tender meat and flavorful noodles. "We don't have much longer, Naruto-kun," said Hinata softly. Naruto grinned as he turned to Hinata. "I can hardly stand the wait to get to the Ichiraku ramen bar," shouted Naruto enthusiastically. "I'm starving." Hinata felt butterflies in her stomach almost immediately as a bold idea came to her. She squirmed slightly, but she decided to roll the dice. Naruto-kun, stammered Hinata. She cleared her tea hoping to mask the self-doubt that laced itself in her voice. "Huh?" asked Naruto. Would it be alright if I went with you?" she said at last. "I can pay," she quickly added. Naruto smiled. "You don't have to, Hinata," replied Naruto cheerfully. Hinata was confused. Did he mean she did not have to pay or that she did not have to come with her? She paused hoping for an explanation. Naruto said nothing as they continued leaping toward Konoha. Hinata's cheeks filled with color as she asserted herself. "I insist," said Hinata with false confidence. Naruto smiled. "Okay then, Hinata," he said softly. At this point Hinata did not care if she had to pay for both meals. She was going to dinner with Uzumaki Naruto. Though she wanted to continue the conversation, she had no idea what to say. She decided to lower her head and avoid eye contact with Naruto in the hopes that she would avoid doing anything to change his mind. It was not long before the two reached the gates of Konoha. There were torches lit to provide light as the sky grew darker. Hinata peered around cautiously, but to her surprise, nothing seemed unusual at all here. "I wonder what they were trying to distract me from," said Naruto as he and Hinata walked into the hidden village. Everything seemed normal to them as they saw villagers walking to businesses to purchase goods. The storms that afternoon had prevented them from doing so earlier. "We should probably find Shino first," said Naruto. Their masked comrade emerged almost immediately from a nearby road. "Naruto, Hinata," he said. "I see you made it back." "Shino," said Naruto excitedly. "What happened?" "As soon as I got back I spoke to Hokage-sama," replied Shino. "She said that we didn't have to worry about a ninja as strong as Naruto." There was an uncharacteristic cheerfulness in his voice. Hinata raised an eyebrow and looked at Shino cautiously. "Yeah," laughed Naruto. "I guess I am pretty strong." "Well anyway, see you later Shino, we're going to eat." Hinata found herself immediately distracted from her suspicions as she thought about going to dinner with Naruto. She was also hungry, and she blushed slightly as she looked up at Naruto. He smiled at her as they turned and began toward Naruto's favorite ramen shop. Hinata looked back briefly at Shino, but to her surprise, she saw only a strangely familiar squawking raven where Shino had stood. "Come on Hinata," said Naruto. She whirled around and quickly caught up to Naruto. She decided that whatever might be strange about Shino could wait until after dinner. After a short walk they arrived. There behind the counter stood Chuki in his tall white hat. He wore a smile on his face and took their orders as they sat at the stools in front of his shop. The fresh smell of seasoned pork and steaming noodles filled the air. Hinata looked at Naruto as he fiddled with his chopsticks impatiently. She had hoped that he would initiate conversation, but it appeared that he would not be able to do anything else until his appetite was satisfied. She pressed her index fingers together nervously as she tried to think of what to say. After several minutes of silence, Naruto finally turned to her and spoke. "I really love this place Hinata-chan," he said with a grin. "No one makes ramen like Chuki." Hinata tried to think of something to say, but all she managed was a nervous laugh. She continued pressing her fingers together as she looked at Naruto. After a few moments of awkward silence, Tsuki finally served them large bowls of his specialty. Itadakimasu, shouted Naruto happily as he thrust his chopsticks between the soft noodles and pulled them into his mouth. He was not exactly the pinnacle of table manners, and Hinata could not help but smile as he noisily slurped his ramen. She slowly pulled some of the noodles into her mouth. She was surprised by their rich flavor. This was not the first time she had eaten here, but this tasted better than anything she had ever had. She could not help but make a little noise as she slurped the thick noodles herself. She turned again and looked at Naruto. He was already drinking the last of the broth from his bowl. He let out a soft sigh as he set his bowl down. Hinata squirmed slightly as Naruto peered over at her. Hinata-chan, said Naruto in a low voice. Hinata turned to him nervously. Would he say something romantic? I don't want to make you pay too much, but would it be alright if I had another bowl? Although asking her to buy him another bowl of ramen was the opposite of romantic, she smiled and nodded. She had enough money to spare, and if it prolonged the time she spent with Naruto, she was glad to spend it. Thanks Hinata-chan, said Naruto. You're the best. He then got Tsuki's attention and placed another order. Hinata smiled as she continued eating. So Hinata, asked Naruto as Tsuki began working to fill his order. Why did you want to eat with me tonight? Hinata turned bright red and choked a bit on the noodles in her mouth. Naruto continued. I mean, don't you usually eat with your family? He asked. Hinata nodded as she regained her breath. Don't get me wrong, said Naruto before she could say anything. I am grateful to you, and I like being with you. I am just curious. Hinata's eyes grew wide as she wondered exactly what he meant when he said he liked being with her. After a few moments, she realized she better say something. I like being with you Naruto-kun, she said boldly. Her face turned a deeper shade of red and she immediately looked down at her bowl. Are you feeling okay Hinata-chan? Asked Naruto. Maybe you have a fever. Hinata shook her head as she took a drink and turned to face Naruto. I feel fine, it's just that she suddenly stopped as she realized she had no idea how she intended to finish her sentence. Just that what? Asked Naruto curiously. Hinata took a deep breath. Started Hinata. Tsuchi came to her rescue by presenting Naruto with a fresh bowl of ramen. He seemed not to be worried about Hinata's response any longer as he again shoveled food into his mouth. It's because I worry about what you think of me, said Hinata after a few moments. Her face was still filled with color, and her eyes seemed to radiate self-doubt. Why would you worry about that Hinata? Asked Naruto in between bites. Hinata was frustrated. He did not seem to be able to understand what she was saying. He continued after chewing and swallowing another mouthful of pork. You are a great ninja, said Naruto as he began scooping up several noodles. Hinata could tell that there was nothing romantic in Naruto's compliment, but it still gave her courage. Hinata thought back to their first Chunin exam. Neji had openly taunted her, and not even her own teammates had expressed confidence in her. Naruto was the only one who had encouraged her. She smiled as she looked at her favorite blonde ninja. She suddenly felt a tremendous inner strength well up inside her. Her anxiety diminished as she opened her mouth. I want to tell you something Naruto, she said slowly. Said Naruto as he swallowed another bite of his meal. His large blue eyes shined in the ambient light. Hinata resisted the impulse to say, never mind. I really like you Naruto. Naruto wore a blank expression on his face. Hinata continued. I don't just mean as a comrade or a friend, she said slowly. Naruto's raised his eyebrows as he tried to make sure he was hearing Hinata correctly. She pulled a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear and cleared her teeth. I mean I really like you, she said slowly. Her hands started trembling and the momentary strength she had found seemed to retreat. She instinctively began pressing her index fingers together again and looking down. Naruto had never paid attention to Hinata like he did as she opened her heart to him. Her smooth skin seemed to have a soft glow in the ambient light. Her eyes seemed to shine as they reflected the orange fire in the back of Tsuki's restaurant. Hinata, said Naruto softly. She raised her eyes to meet his. Is that why you pass out around me so much? Hinata turned red and small beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. At last she nodded. Naruto thought back to remember all the times that she had acted strange, and that he had not really noticed. He felt slightly foolish for being so oblivious, but at the same time he could not help but smile as he watched Hinata. He wondered how Naruto reached and put his hands over hers. Naruto-kun, she said softly. Do you really like me? She pulled herself back and looked into his deep blue eyes. Naruto smiled as he ran his fingers through her long hair. Hinata-chan, he said softly. I thought you were kind of weird with all your passing out and fevers, but now, you are definitely the kind of girl I could like. Hinata saw the familiar blunt honesty behind Naruto's blue eyes did not waver as he spoke. And Hinata, he said softly. I won't make you pay for my ramen. She could not help but laugh. A tear of joy rolled down her cheek as she wrapped her arms around Naruto. You wouldn't have had to pay anyway, said Tsuki with a smile. You have done me a great service. Hinata and Naruto turned to face the old ramen shop genius. They were a little embarrassed that he had listened in on their conversation. What service is that? Asked Hinata softly. You have given Naruto love, he said. Hinata raised an eyebrow in confusion. He has never been in a situation like this. It's better than anything I could have put before him. You see, a leaf ninja is much like a leaf on a tree. Naruto and Hinata looked at one another cautiously and then back at Tsuki. A leaf needs stable temperatures, a steady supply of water, and exposure to sunlight every day, said Tsuki. Do you know what happens when leaves change? Hinata and Naruto gave him a look of confusion. A black raven flew in and landed next to Tsuki. They fall, he whispered. Suddenly his elderly eyes opened wide to reveal the Uchiha clan's bloodline limit, the Sharingan. Dozens of ravens flew into the ramen shop from all directions and swarmed around Naruto and Hinata. Byakugan! Shouted Hinata. Everything around them began to melt away as the powerful genjutsu technique dispelled. Naruto and Hinata fell to the ground as the earth spun around them. As they finally regained their balance and turned to see that it was not the ramen shop genius that stood before them, it was Uchiha Itachi. His dark robes fluttered in the cold air of the cave they found themselves in. As they looked behind them, they saw a strange statue with strange depictions of eyes and hands. This is the ceiling statue, said Itachi. Not the most romantic retreat to express young love, but since it will be the last place you will ever see, try and make the best of it. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.